just realized that I'm in the Safire Project video from Bath. I'm in that like 6 minutes something for a few seconds.
I noticed it was before I got there, that footage, because it was the way the sun was. It was morning, and I don't think I got there till like probably 10 something. But you guys were delayed anyway, so I missed a lot of that crap. So that was good.
Yeah, I was out buying a laser pointer in the morning, so I didn't get there till late. So it was really good that there was a hold up because I didn't miss anything.
Did you you were playing with a cat or something, or?
No, they needed a laser pointer for the talkers to point at the screen.
Gotcha.
And no one had one. So
oh, I see.
Yeah.
And Daniel's here. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, what's going on, Neil?
Not much. I'm just.
You hear me okay?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
All right, cool.
And we're just me and Gareth are going to have a conversation here in a sec. He just got his tea, and we're going to figure out how the or what the Safire people had said. So that's
what they recently say something new.
Oh well, you saw the video for
oh yeah,
update.
Oh yeah, definitely.
And now I had to watch it twice because it was. I got to give you credit, Gareth. You read through that video the way that I dissect an episode of Stargate Atlantis or something. You know, like
Stargate Atlantis.
No, just whatever show I'm into. Like, trust me, I'm just one of those people that like for example, Fringe was happening. I mean, you can't count how many times I watched over going, no, I will find the observer in this episode. There he is. He was only there for a few seconds. Did you see the frames where the screen went there? Yeah, between the where she was switching between the train cars. You see, and the reflection. Yeah, that's him. Yeah, that's the kind of person I was there. So it was just nice to see, because I don't usually think of someone trying to hide. I don't want to say hide. To hint at information in a video. Of course, I do have the advantage of kind of knowing a little bit. Like, there's stories that were being told. Like, I heard that story back in 2016. So that story about the flare up and a few things that happened during the flare-up in the Safire video. They discuss a flare-up that caused something that was not expected. But that was a while ago. I know that much. And I know that it also lit up all of their flash drives in their pockets, had little LEDs on them. And they just all lit up.
Interesting.
So I thought that was interesting. I don't know if they told you that, Gareth, but I remember that.
Yes, no, he did it indeed recount exactly that story. The story of the USB drives and it flashing away, and yes, yep, I got that one too.
Okay, good. So I want to. That's my credentials to you. Okay, that we're.
Oh, geez.
So we've heard this story. So, but I just want to give you a date on that. So that means this is, the stuff that they have is not. They've been working on this for a while, and obviously perfecting the last bit of it was something that people were going, why aren't they talking about it? Why aren't they talking about it? Why aren't they saying? And even at 2017, I was like, this seems like a lot of statistics, and you're giving us some pictures, but I was actually kind of, I don't want to say bored, but I wasn't really, pumped, like I was expecting for a Safire, because it was a lot of data, and I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm going through spreadsheet school,
Oh, yeah.
So it was, but that's okay. It had to be done. They were doing for a reason. And I'm sure the picture became clearer to you as they talked to you.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the things that he, in the video, he talks about integrity, and he talks about the integrity of the company and integrity of the data. And that for me was it was a throwaway comment almost. In the video, it didn't really, for me, didn't hit home what he meant by it. But he explained it in a lot more detail when I spoke to him yesterday. And I kind of understand why it is that they are not releasing the information as quickly as probably we would like. And it is all to do with the integrity that they put behind it. So when they say integrity, what they mean is it's not just something that's happened 3 or 4 times. It's something that they can reproduce, and they understand the conditions under which it occurs. They may not understand what is happening, but they can reproduce it, and they know exactly what to do to reproduce it. So that's why when at the 2017 conference, they already knew that transmutation was taking place, but they didn't have enough evidence, according to their integrity, in terms of the method that they follow, to be able to put their name behind it. And you know, in the video that I've just put together, a lot of it for me
it's playing right now, actually. So, in the recording.
Yeah, okay.
So.
I meant the one that I've just edited, the one that I'm still waiting for to look through. What becomes obvious, because I think in my mind there are 2 important things I think that he realizes from my video that was not obvious. And I mean, I think a lot of people have kind of jumped on the bandwagon that I said nuclear, you know, that they were building a classic nuclear reactor, making the fuel, generating it, and then remediating it.
I think that was sort of, I don't know if it was directly implied, but I sort of heard that story at Bath.
I heard nothing about nuclear or anything about the Safire Project. Why would they need nuclear anything? I mean, nuclear fuel like uranium, plutonium.
Well, so the idea would be they make it,
right?
So they would generate it. Okay. And this is from me analyzing the video.
No, I thought you were right on the money there.
Any element, essentially, right? Any element could suddenly show up there, basically.
Not quite. There's I think that you were also right, Gareth, on the what's it called, the structured atom model by Edwin Cowell. The idea that there are certain elements that are easier to make because of their construction and the way that you combine them with your beginning materials. But anyway, I think you were onto something.
Like according to the Safire video, any element, meaning any cosmic element that we'll typically see in the rest of the universe.
Yes, and in fact they have a list.
And that's a very important distinction, right?
Yes.
Yes and no. I think what they're quite open about is that they haven't analyzed everything. Like they've analyzed certain parts of the surface, and obviously the cost to analyze the small parts of it is quite expensive. So you know, when he talks about in the video that they find manganese in the atmosphere and they haven't found it on the actual anode, that doesn't mean that it's not on the anode. It means that where they've looked so far, they've not found it. So there is a high probability that it's not on the anode, but they can't rule it out because they haven't scanned the whole surface. And this comes back to the whole integrity thing, that they don't want to say something that someone then later says, yeah, but hold on, you said this, and now you're saying that, because the data didn't necessarily back up all of it, you know?
Right.
They're being cautious, yes.
Yeah, which I kind of understand, and that part of the problem, I think, in my perception,
it almost seems like magic. So yeah,
that's how David Lapointe talking about the primer fields. You know, trying to make sure that everything is. If you notice that the primer fields video number 3 is gone, it's no longer there. He probably said one sentence with 2 transposed. Yeah, but
how long ago is it that he produced those videos? Because
God, it's so old, like 10 years, I think, right?
Yeah. And then I've seen a few threads on the internet discussing his theory and the problems with his theory and where it has merit and where it doesn't have merit.
Okay.
But then a lot of people towards the end of that thread go, well, what's happened to him? You know, he's just sort of disappeared off the face of the earth and produced nothing since then.
Well, he just recently came out with a video. He's released all of the technology. You can 3D print the bowls with it's got the all the schematics. We covered it in our space.
Actually, that plays a lot more into your Plasmoid video, because that's one of the things that I liked. I don't want to say the only thing, because there are a few more, but about his primer field videos straight up was David Lapointe's ability to, in relatively low power, be able to show some of these effects by simply imitating that magnetic field to make a low, I don't want to say a relatively low powered plasmoid, a very large compared to what you would do, you know, in from your Quasar video, if Eric Lerner's experiment, for example, very microscopic.
Yeah, I mean, obviously his is small, and
I don't want to interrupt you again. So go with this, please.
Don't let me get you tangential if you have an agenda.
He has a goal. He has a goal.
I've never been on a call like this before. So.
Oh well, actually, this is rare. We're actually just because this happened, and basically they contacted Gareth because he questioned the Safire Project, and Monty is a cool cat, and he actually will address these things, and Michael, of course, is the same way. So one of them got in contact with him. So
I mean, I was surprised to be contacted by them, and he said this is not something that he normally does. So it was like a double surprise to me. I mean, what's bizarre is how the video itself has, you know, in relative terms for me, sort of exploded. I mean, it's been up for 2 days, and we are at 1,200 views already.
Oh yeah, I saw
it. Yeah, it's mental.
Well, it is.
So people are obviously.
Could you please send me the link so I can share it?
It's actually in this thread, but it's also in the. If you go to the Electric View related content, it's like the top video.
You're clearly not a subscriber. What can I say?
Just on YouTube? I don't. Well,
yeah, YouTube, the Electric View.
Do you think I'm really going to be getting notifications from YouTube? Honestly, it's pretty messed up, guys. I mean, I am completely shadow banned. Just try to search for my channel. Try to search for it. I dare you. I dare you to try to search for my channel.
You mean what you're saying is if you subscribe to my channel would go black.
Okay, don't look it up on mine then. No, ignore me altogether.
Get a fake Russian server. You know, whatever you got to do. I don't know. Watch the videos. Don't watch the videos. What about
we'll take care of you, comrade.
Aren't you worried about trypophobia? You're not buying that new phone, are you? You don't want to get trypophobia. You can see that phone and vomit. You could see the phone and go into a
trance or something,
a fugue state. Yeah.
But anyway, this video that Gareth did, see the pattern was fantastic. But he was basically, I mean, we did a little Bath video because we had a chance of talking there at Bath, and obviously the subject of transmutation had come up, but there was nothing like obviously Gareth's analysis of their video, which was basically things that just what wasn't said. And that's what I liked about, you know, when something's done by a director, like in a show, you could say, are they hanging a lantern on that? Was that intentional? You know, with real life, it's not as easy, of course, but you dissected it very well. And his dissection of that video obviously prompted Monty to make the call to contact him. And because, of course, See the Pattern was being very, or Gareth was being very, very diligent, and obviously not, I don't know what to say, debunking bugger.
Not biased. I think one of the things Monty said, it was an unbiased review of the video, which is, you know, kind of what I tend to want to do. I'm definitely not someone who enjoys debunking stuff. Admittedly, you know, talk to me black holes, and that's a different story. But that's more because there are other models that support that idea better, and there is less evidence to support black holes. But you know, and it's funny because it's funny because I'd never planned to do the Safire video, and it was someone who commented saying, "Where's the Safire update video?" And I originally was going to write back and go, that's not the sort of thing I do. I don't like comment on other people's videos. That's not something I do. But I watched it, and then I kind of thought, that's a bit weird. Like, why are they saying that, and why are they not saying this? And then I watched it again, and for me, it was all about the things that they said that they couldn't say, as well as the things that they didn't say. And behind that was sort of, I saw a sort of story. Which,
that's a lot of layers on top of layers, isn't it?
Well, it is. But in fact, I understand the problem. So talking to Monty in more detail, the problem is that you're trying to portray what you've done to the broad public. So this is not to scientists. The video and the way it was made is really about a commercial thing, showing what they've done to the widest audience possible. Now, admittedly, it was shown.
They were being very clear on that they were basically, now we have to open it up to commercial. I was like, yep, you know.
If you haven't figured out how to transmute gold out of it, we have no interest.
Oh, the friggin' Mayflowers from the, what was that movie, Hudson Hawk?
You've got titanium, but have you got platinum?
But therein is the problem, because certainly from my perspective, I sort of saw them as more of a research institute. Therefore, you know, the expectation was that they would just, you know, move from one phase to the next phase, and they would release documentation. But really, you know, from talking to Monty, it is really just a commercial company. And part of the problem is that they've done their mandate. They've proved what they set out to prove. So therefore, the train has sort of ended, and now they have to continue that train. But they're in a precarious position because they need more funding, and because the science that is involved here is very far outside of mainstream. Trying to persuade an investor that actually this is a really good idea to invest in is extremely difficult. Therefore, the words that you choose and the language you choose makes it really important for the story. And that story is part of the problem, because when you start to look at it, and certainly in the conversation I had with Monty, what they have discovered is multidimensional in terms of it isn't just one thing. There are so many different things that happened that kind of question, well, how does this work and why does that happen? That there are many different avenues that they could explore, yet they have to choose one in order to try and acquire funding, which is where this notion of producing energy comes from.
Of course.
And which is why the language that they use is a very much toned down language. They talk about transmutation, you know, which really, if we look at
that's a tough term to use, you know. Transmutation is a pretty hard word to say, especially considering the history of that term, right?
But the alternative would be fusion, and that has all
fusion.
Has all sorts of other connotations that they don't want to be associated with. But the fact is, I mean, the reality is they don't actually know how the energy is being released, but what they see is a rearrangement of things at an atomic level that is releasing this energy, which very much points to it being fusion, but not fusion as we know it. It is certainly not high velocity collisions that are causing the transmutation. And transmutation, I don't think is necessarily the right term, but I understand why they use it. And you're seeing all of these different elements being produced because of what goes on. And obviously, if you're trying to sell that to an investor, you want it to sound as plausible as possible without making it sound like it's some sort of fairy dust that magically will create energy out of nothing.
Of course.
Sorry. Can I ask what you don't like about transmutation? If it is one element turning to another element, presumably.
Just because it's not really a scientific term as such. You know, if we look at what's going on, then to me, even transmutation sounds magical in itself. You know, it does like an alchemist.
And it's like right, like alchemy. That's exactly what you think of as soon as you hear that word. That's what I think of right away.
I don't. I think of transmutation of the elements, but that's only because I read way too much stupid science stuff. But
it sounds like a pretty technical term. I mean, if we're seeing a new phenomena, we're going to have like a neologism. We're going to have to think of a new word for a new phenomena that we haven't previously described.
Well, that's
exactly what I said in my video. This is a phenomena that is going to require a different word, because none of the words really fit it properly. I don't think transmutation is I think it's a word that I want to wash my mouth with. It doesn't sit nicely with me.
And like you said, fusion I think is bad too, because fusion, like you said, it has these connotations with things like the nuclear energy, nuclear bombs and stuff, and this has nothing to do with any of that. So there does kind of need to be a different term, right?
Well, it's also apparently, and the trouble is that it has been so hammered on that it is practically magical in its nature, which is obviously not true. One of the things that even to support what we were talking about, if you're shooting high energy neutrons from a nuclear reaction, even that, breaking the uranium into two separate parts, you find that there are two peaks of what, not a bell curve. That means that you have two separate things you break things into. It belies a structure underneath the atom, and perhaps they're playing with those structures, perhaps the way the sun plays with those structures. I think that's the big hint, obviously, but
it seems like there's some sort of a fractal thing going on there. I agree.
Anyway, please go on, Gareth. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I think it is a mechanism by which you can build more and more complicated atomic structures, and in that process, it's releasing vast amounts of energy, and that's basically what they're looking to harness. So their phase 2 that they're kind of going out with is your conventional reactor. It is use that heat energy, boil some water, drive it into a turbine, and generate some electricity. Now, obviously, the next phase, what they have to be able to do is quantify how much energy output is there, because at the moment they don't know. They have to turn it off, so they can't actually say how much it potentially would generate. So
also, what would happen if you could cool it, intercool it, which they can't obviously do. They're limited by funding and stuff like that. But in an industrial setting, you could make a sphere like that and anode, so to speak, at a larger scale, and actually cool the inside of it to keep it from actually melting or something, you know?
Yeah, well, I think what they're looking to do is to design a mechanism whereby they harness that heat energy that comes out of the reactor. And how they do that, again, that's obviously something that they're working on. That is the next phase. So the next phase isn't that they're building the power plant. It is the design to take them towards it. And at the same time, the whole question that I raised around the use of a nuclear reactor and remediating that is also something that they're looking at. So there are multiple strands that they're sort of developing that they're running along. So I understand why some of this information is difficult for them to release, because you don't want to give away that secret, that knowledge of how to build it until you've acquired funding. And they are going down the route of patents and all of that. And I think another reason why he wanted to talk to me is because I think there is a general impression that they are sort of withholding information on purpose. And in their video, it certainly doesn't come over why there are these delays, other than the fact, obviously, they're looking for funding, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't release it. But it is to do with the structure, the way that they are set up, because they are not a research institute. It is a company, and their current funding has ended, and therefore they have to make sure that what they've produced, their reports, obviously they're going to produce for the end of that, then also allow them to continue to produce phase 2 and beyond. And the reality is there is so much more that they don't understand from what they saw in the reactor that it begs many questions. I mean, one of the things that he talked about is that when this event happened, when that sudden heating event happened, certain things melted that shouldn't have melted, and certain things that should have melted didn't melt. So,
oh geez, that is a conundrum.
And then he told me that they did an experiment where they introduced a very reactive gas. He didn't tell me what it was, but they introduced a very reactive gas to see what would happen, and they were very nervous about doing that.
Right.
So when they first started, they were expecting to have to turn it off really, really quickly, and they turned it on, and nothing happened. They turned it up, still nothing happened. And then they turned it up to like 11 to see what would happen.
Right.
And they
in
just
the spinal tap
scale,
discharge. Right.
Exactly, in the spinal tap. He said exactly that. And actually what happened
I hang around with these guys way too much.
is that the anode actually became cool. So it did the opposite of everything that they expected. So there are so many things that are just like, wow, like why is that happening? What is the reason behind it? And obviously for some of this, they haven't done enough experimentation to be able to say that this will always happen. And he said that they even had a physicist who came in to look at some of this, who was absolutely dumbfounded. He couldn't understand. For him, it was such a paradigm shift that he said he was almost catatonic.
Maybe
Like,
there was some
made...
type of low pressure zones that were created when the plasma interaction started to happen that acted like tiny magnetic tornadoes.
Well, this is
low pressure, high pressure zones.
What you're discussing is the double layer phenomenon. Is what I mean. We see the spheres, so perhaps maybe there were pinches right there. Now, I never imagined that you could just have, like, was that just a CME type event? Do CME like events make spheres? Do they make planets? Like, there's so many interesting questions that are generated from just seeing this thing in operation. But our analogies are not science, really. Like, I mean, I'm just telling a story, and my story happens to be, you know, backed up, and I can back up points of it and make good arguments. But these are the people who give weight to my words or to anything, really. I mean, they're actually doing something. And after this, I mean, this is rogue science at its best in a way, because you're going out and proving a concept against everything that everyone is telling you. Because, and to be fair, astrophysicists don't exactly know everything with regards to what's going on around a planet either, or a sun, or anything. We're all in this together,
I agree.
but ignoring what is basically an electric field effect. When you go to magnetohydrodynamics, there is an electric field effect that you're ignoring, and I think this is an example of why we probably should be paying more attention to that kind of thing, in my opinion.
So I don't know if this helps in any way, but this morning I was doing a video. I found an article. I think it was on Science Alert, and the article was basically about the way that stars have the ability to act like comets and be moving in a completely inappropriate fashion with respect to the rest of the stars around its location in the galaxy.
Inappropriate, right? Like they were being lewd.
Well, yeah, they were showing off too much of their crust or something, right?
Yeah, not proper at all.
No, moving in the wrong direction, moving at a weird speed,
right?
Something like that. Moving, perpendicular to the galactic plane. Or something,
the Sagittarius A phenomenon, zinging a plasmoid, just flying around that thing.
Well, yeah, and so if you read the article, basically what the article says is that, well, they don't know what could have done it, so it was probably flung out there by a neutron star or a black hole. Case closed. Yeah. And I thought to myself, I said, like I say in the video, I have to expose my astronomical depth here, because I think I said late 90s, but it was more like the mid 90s, somebody discovered a neutron star doing the same thing. They're like, how come I can't see that star? Oh, there's gravitational lensing. Well, why is there gravitational lensing? There's a neutron star in between me and the thing I'm looking at. Well, but now it's not there anymore. So where did it go? And then they found it someplace else. And then they waited a while and they found it someplace else. And they waited a while and they find it someplace really far away. And they're like, oh, wow, this thing's moving at crazy speed. So I very quickly searched and I found a neutron star that's moving at 1,500 kilometers per second. Like the highest solar wind speed you'll see. There's a neutron star someplace moving around at those kinds of speeds.
Yeah, that's 1/5 the speed of light.
Yeah, yeah. Relativistic effects that, well, it should have, quote, relativistic, end quote, effects. that would be measurable if you could take a ride on that thing. You'd be able to prove or disprove lots of stuff, let's just say.
Well, and this, of course, has to do with how far they are away. And just watching what Gareth just put out with the Plasmoid video, that you're having a problem with energy and distance. That could be a big factor in your calculations.
Yeah, this thing was discovered in 2006. I still have the article up.
But this is all about trying to figure out Safire right now, because I want to hear more about this. So
I hear you.
Let's put the focus on that. What is what's going on with then? Obviously, you've talked and told some stories, and obviously, I've heard the same stories. So, I'm sure Buddy has heard a few of them too. So, what they're doing and what they're obviously creating and thinking the ideas behind a power plant. We've talked here about the idea of using this type of technology, transmutation, for lack of a better term, to destroy radioactive waste, for example.
Well, he confirmed that they have already done it. They have indeed tested.
That's amazing.
He pointed out that it wasn't uranium.
Okay,
which is what I alluded to in the video. But
you didn't allude to it. You almost like tapped it right in there, like this must be uranium. Okay, but still, no. I mean, it certainly it attracts attention. It could be cesium for all we know, right? So.
Yeah, but he confirmed that they tested it out to see whether that idea from MIT actually worked, and they had indeed tested it. The problem is, how viable is it large scale? I mean, that's the problem with a lot of these things, is you might be able to do it with a really small amount, but can you actually scale it up that actually you can process the amount of waste from a proper nuclear power plant? And that's a big question.
That's a lot of waste, and if it's just process volume type of thing, and I can see why they put that the wind being at the top for energy versus waste product type of thing.
Yeah, and again, I mean, when I spoke to him, that for me was a little bit misleading, the way that they put that in. But what he was trying to explain is that it isn't. When you look at the Safire reactor, if we go back to the original concept, that it is doing some sort of fusion, whatever we want to call it, that right. is generating energy from rearranging these atomic structures, that the cost to build it, the overall efficiency, has to take into account everything. It's not just what you put in, versus what you put out. It's the whole cost of manufacturing it, where you put it, where you get the fuel in, how you then transport the energy out. So that's
nuclear energy is really efficient. The really downside is how much land you have to destroy and how much fuel you have to waste to get at the uranium.
And it's a finite resource. That's but with the question is
maybe not
with Sapphire, is it? Yeah, well, again, it all depends on what's viable, large scale.
Of course.
I'll take if you've got one of those Star Trek replicators, I'll order 3 of those for me.
Actually, this could be the foundation of Star Trek replication. I can't believe I just said that in my lifetime. Because, it's ridiculous. But when you think about it, if you had a bunch of these and you had a massive computer, you were able to sort of do the magic part of assembling something like a CNC machine. Right. Then you could just make the materials for the CNC machine.
Or like a 3D printer, but on the atomic level. You'd have to have a really fast computer that's got a...
you occasionally have to walk over and add dirt to it so it can transmute
the way you
it.
Say it has to be a fast computer, let alone the fact that this printer has to be pretty. It's the printer that does the magic, not your computer.
That's true. You'd have to have a fast computer and printer.
But it would have to be. You could see it that if you could squeeze the Safire reactor down to the smallest possible scale, where it effectively would output a single atom,
right,
like the nib of a pen.
Right.
Then indeed you could build a 3D printer that would print anything.
Yeah, actually, even at a lower state, you could just have something that could give you a selection. Like you would have elements like printers have colors. You could have this can make copper and aluminum and steel and a few other things. Material, and you can build anything as long as it's out of those. And if you have more different sapphire probes, you could make more colors. I know that sounds absolutely ridiculous, but I don't know. It's just science fiction has gone. I didn't expect this conversation to suddenly touch on 24th century. But I mean, holograms are one thing, but holodecks are another. But you could see that vision. That was a natural inclination that you didn't have in the original because holograms were a 1970s thing with light refraction, not something that was really well known in the 60s. Lasers were just like getting there. So to bring that extension to this idea of not just, because even back on the Enterprise, they had cooks and chefs and stuff like that, but they just sort of beam food directly into your mouth in Star Trek Next Generation, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
That's actually,
Just
one of the things
scan it directly into your bloodstream.
I mean, seriously, why does anyone need a spacesuit? They can just beam oxygen into your blood. But anyway, please.
What do we need a digestive system anymore?
As much as this is fun and speculative.
Transport food into our bloodstream directly. What are you, a savage? You got a digestive tract?
No one does that anymore. It's so passé.
Just plug yourself in.
Yep.
Just change the battery every now and then.
Oh my God. Okay. I'm having like sci-fi flashes because I never pictured this conversation. I mean, this really kind of actually interesting. This could be like the beginning of something that I didn't expect to be sitting on the beginning of, if you know what I mean.
I think Star Wars actually predicted the smartphone when you think of it. If you look at the Star Wars universe, right?
We can go all
I was
about
a real Star Wars nerd.
Oh, yeah.
predicted it.
There is no paper in the world of Star Wars. Like if you play the Star Wars role-playing game, you'd know this because you tell the judge,
"Oh yeah,
hey, I want to take a piece of paper and write something down," and he goes, "You can't do that. There's no paper or pens or anything like that. You got to get a data pad. It's a little handheld thing the size of a deck of cards that you get data in."
Obviously, that's why it's called a data pad.
Yeah, it was a very imaginative term that they came up with. Much like the organization that built Darth Vader's suit. Remember what they were called?
I don't know either. They live on a volcano. I don't know why he would stay there. Why would you stay at a place where they chopped off 3 of your limbs? Are you just lonely or?
Did you ever watch Red Letter Media's video about 10 things you don't know about Darth Vader's suit? Because you will never view the franchise again.
Okay, well, I can't. I will have to do that, but it's still. I want to talk Sapphire. So
sorry, yeah.
I apologize.
No, it's okay. It's just wonderful. It was just a wonderful side note because we have to laugh about what this could mean, but I understand. So go on, Gareth.
Do you guys know about the tokamak reactor? Or
Huh?
Yes,
do you guys
we
know
know about the Chinese fusion reactor?
No, well, I didn't know that. Well, I assumed. I guess I didn't really.
Yeah.
You know, like why wouldn't they?
I guess you know more about. There's a really big project in France. They're building a really big fusion reactor there, the International Thermonuclear Experimental Reactor, the IETER. Do you know?
What does it do? What's the physics?
Well, this is the thing that it's sort of always surprising to see, like in Gareth's video. Like Gareth's video is all amazing, wonderful, but you know, he's saying they're not telling us certain things at Safire, but for the other fusion reactors in the world aren't telling us anything. Like Safire seems to be telling us more than any organization.
They're smashing, but not necessarily.
All the universities won't tell you anything like about what they're doing. And I don't know.
That's true. Actually, someone commented that Lockheed Martin are also producing one, and actually they have beautiful pictures on their website, but it is all glossy sort of stuff.
Yeah, this French video of the construction is amazing, but they don't tell you anything about what they're doing. They just show you videos of it being built.
Yeah. Aren't there allegedly a bunch of underground ones in North America under the U.S. someplace that are running, you know, some kind of underground government facilities? I could have sworn there are allegedly a bunch of like working fusion reactors.
You're going to tell me Element 115 by any chance?
I can't. No, I'm not going to say Element 105. No, I'm not going to say Element 105.
But you're not wrong. I mean, just the idea of fusion alone is I mean, always considered. I mean, the way that they describe it, they're trying to use the model that was basically derived from. It was not proved. Each step has been proved, but they have not actually made the full process of hydrogen to helium, which is basically the big goal, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I guess some of this work calls into question all of that theory. You know, the only successful fusion that I'm aware of would be the fusion bomb. But then you'd go back and question, well, was that a similar process to what we're seeing in Safire? Just the fact that you have to blow up another bomb, you have to blow a dirty
atomic
bomb up, a nuclear bomb, to cause
set off
the
a
fusion
hydrogen
reaction.
Bomb.
Yeah.
It's the igniter.
Yeah, but is that actually what's happening inside of it actually based on what we see in Safire?
And the next thing you're going to say is the word cold fusion, and then Professor Robitaille is gonna kick your door in and say that's not thermal. Learn the term thermal before you say cold fusion.
Well, it does. I have to say that the whole Safire thing does make me question all of these claims of alchemy in the past. Like, is it possible that actually? Well, you laugh, but is it?
I think it's probably possible. I think it's absolutely possible.
I mean, the fact is that we believe that ancient civilization was less advanced. I think that's wrong. Could it well be that actually they had technology? Because Safire, if you look at the machine itself, is not that complex in terms of what we're talking about. If you look at an electric sun model, sure, we need control circuits to manage it. You need to be able to measure what comes out of it. But the actual mechanics that go inside of it, it's not complicated.
What's the electrical input statistics on it? Like, how much amperage does it require? Stuff like that. Is it?
I think he was saying that it's like 1800 watts. I think in one of the first model that they.
Yeah, that's basically half of a radiator for a baseboard heater. In case anyone was questioning how much energy that is.
Sure. Yeah, like a small hairdryer.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, exactly. But what I don't know is whether that figure that he quotes is for the original bell jar experiment that they did. I don't know that.
True.
But
go on.
I was going to say, but either way, it's not a lot of power, because even if you look at the bell jar one, you can still see they obviously don't get transmutation as far as I'm aware in the bell jar one, but obviously they saw that the effectively like a mini star being formed inside of the bell jar. Now, what's interesting, before I forget, is that one of the things he discussed was the anode, because what I wasn't really aware of is that the material that they use for the anode makes a huge difference to the elements that are transmutated.
I remember in the older video he was talking about how they have a different type. They got one that could handle a hell of a lot more temperature, and that one was just completely vaporized also.
So that was their probe, the probe that they used to measure that was the Langmuir probe.
Right, the probe, not the anode. Okay, my mistake.
Yeah, but what they've found is that the type of material you use for the anode heavily impacts how efficient the machine is and whether you get this transmutation. And what's interesting, and I don't really understand where this would be documented, but the Thunderbolt suggested a material for them to use, which I think was tungsten. I'm not entirely sure.
I said titanium, but I meant tungsten.
So tungsten would make sense.
It's high temperature.
High temperature withstands but what's interesting is that they actually found that if you change the material, different materials will allow different elements to be transmutated and change the efficiency of the machine.
It's like a set of dyes. That's weird. It's really weird. Like atomic level dyes is essentially installing.
Some of it comes if you remember the video that they showed where they talked about the crystal structure. Remember they showed images of those crystals with little holes, and they looked like vent holes in the crystals. Now, what was not clear, and one of the things he cleared up, is that crystal structure you see is not the transmutated material. It is the actual anode itself. And I therefore think that the crystalline structure of the anode, whether it's titanium or whatever, will affect how easy, because if I think of it in terms of a material has to have a nucleation point to start forming, and I wonder if the type of material affects the place at which the material can start to form. Whether it's sharp or whether it's to do with a charge in the actual material, the structure of the atomic structure of that material. I don't know.
It should affect it. If you're passing current through one material, the interference patterns coming at the Hall currents and so on that come out of that material are going to be slightly different. As the crystal forms, the crystal becomes the anode. Like, I think that's what you were saying, right? In other words, the crystal itself is becoming the anode.
Well, actually, it appears to be crystallized. And then, the surface, but in between them, we saw evidence of different materials, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, but the material will obviously be crystalline because it's metal. So metal will have a crystalline structure anyway. Now, I guess one of the things that he doesn't discuss and maybe doesn't want to discuss is obviously if you're talking about titanium, there are many different ways that you can grow the crystals for titanium, and it makes a huge difference to its strength and its ability to withstand heat. And that's why in fighter jets they have these really expensive laboratories, I suppose would be the word, where they grow these crystals because you want the crystal to be as strong as possible. Therefore, how you allow that crystal to grow and how you allow it to interleave with other crystals changes its strength. And I wonder, therefore, if that has any role to play. I mean, I don't know. I'm just at this stage.
But they're not using the pure titanium in the alloys on the planes or anything. They're just using that as an additive for the steel.
True, but it affects how that material then forms, because and in that case you're talking about an alloy,
right?
So
right.
It's in between.
It wants to line up in a certain place in that crystalline structure on each sheet or layer of lattice or whatever you want to call it.
Well,
I wonder whether that crystalline structure affects how the material transmutates and where it transmutates.
I would say that's a very sound theory.
I would agree. In fact, as someone who anyone who studied, like, for example, a transistor and learns about doping on a diode or something, and you can see the effect of just changing a few molecules and creates a positive layer inside of an actual piece of metal. Now, I'm not saying that's exactly what's happening here. I'm saying that there is there could be a relationship between the surface structure, as you said, and then these where these points want to form. If there's and of course, do they, is it the shape of this resonance that is occurring with them? And of course, we talked about this in my little geology paper about what happens when you're dealing with forces right up against, like how much force is actually able to be exerted upon anything when it gets right down to the surface of something. I mean, we're talking about
electron v electron, right?
Well, we know that how much potential there is here on Earth because we can travel up through the air, but the sun has a lot more potential. But here we are now looking at just the Safire Project and seeing it, and they were looking at the voltage potential staying relatively even, but a bunch of other things happening depending on where they were, and you could see that barrier when they stuck the probe through it. Now, this is where if you start, they said it contracted, so it pulls in. So now you're dealing with a capacitance that starts multiplying because the electric field strength starts rapidly increasing. So it's pulling it in. So all the activity is now happening closer to the actual tungsten instead of happening out further away from it. So they've almost sort of like destroyed what would be called the cathode dark space, I guess we would say it would be called. In a crux tube, if we were trying to relate it to something electrical. But this is the kind of thing that I'm thinking of, and obviously, it depends on your physics, I guess, what your specialty is, what you're seeing. Sure. But this is sort of like in the nature of the plasmoid. You were talking about how the plasmoid has a constricting magnetic field as it begins to compress upon itself. Well, electric fields do also hold energy. Clearly, they can build up energy and store it. Yeah. So.
Well, guys, I think you've caused some fusion in my brain here, and I got to get going. I'm a little hobbled. I had to actually call off from work today. I think I fractured my femur a little bit. It's not as bad as it sounds. I can walk, just not well. So hopefully I'll be back to normal in a couple of days here. If it is fractured, it's not very bad. I don't
feel terrible now, but.
Yeah, hopefully I won't go into shock when I stand up here. Anyway, thanks again, guys. Next time I see a call like this, I'll definitely stop by. So, cheers.
Yeah, anytime, my friend.
Right. No worries.
Yeah,
take care. Oh, yes, definitely. You too, bud.
Yeah, for me, one of the questions would be long term. So if they're running the Safire chamber and they're seeing transmutation, well, eventually that's going to build up enough that I suppose it will affect the ability of the anode to function properly. So is that a maintenance problem? I guess these are questions that they would obviously have to address in further down the line, because that not there yet. But that's one of the things.
True.
That kind
How
of
easy would it be to harvest the materials that they get from these probes? Well, you just have to run probes and dunk them in a solution to get the stuff out of them. Like, I mean, there's so many logistical questions, but if each step can be achieved, I could see the aspect of doing everything in one chamber, though, or at least you make your fuel and you destroy it, you know. And
I mean, one of the things that he talked about is that they're not really clear where the transmutation takes place. They see it in the atmosphere, or they see parts of the some elements being formed in the atmosphere and some being formed on the surface of the anode, but they're not clear whether it forms on the anode and then is ejected outwards into the
it has a different potential now, so it's flung out.
So it's a lot of questions. I mean, in theory, if they could make the machine produce the materials in the atmosphere, it might be easier for them to siphon off. But if they're restricted to it forming on the anode itself, then obviously that comes back to your point. How do you harvest it off then? Or even if you're not interested in harvesting it, how do you clean the anode? Because at some stage you're going to have to clean it because it becomes less and less efficient.
Well, yeah, and of course these are also things that have popped up in battery maintenance questions over the years too.
Yeah.
So, but normally we're not seeking. We know that for example, sulfur buildup on a lead acid battery is due to low voltage. They can no longer repel the sulfur. The sulfur begins to bond. So as long as you keep it above like 9 volts or 10 volts, you're usually fine. That's battery maintenance, for example. But that's a chemical thing. This is a whole new territory.
Yeah, and this breaks some of our plasma physics. So, it's.
But how much do we really know about plasma physics? I mean, we've only really started to study it. I mean, how much further we move from Alfvén's original ideas, even with regards to, as you said, self-conflicting magnetic fields would contract upon itself. I'm still of the theory that these things must or likely have a power source. We just don't see it. But it's only because of you get nothing's free, I guess, feeling of the engineer.
Oh, you're talking about plasmoids now.
Well, I was saying there's relationships to plasmoids with regards to the constricting and stuff like that we are going to see happening on the surface of, if we're playing the same game, if we're seeing, you're going to have to see, I mean, the anode tufts themselves are magnetic constrictions in an electric field, type of thing. Like there's layers there that are overlapping in a way.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Our understanding of these things is woefully bad. I mean, even the idea of the plasmoid, I think there's so much more to be done to understand how those work, because that indeed there's Eric Lerner who's done laboratory experiments. There's Bostic who's done laboratory experiments. There are probably hundreds, if not thousands, of experiments that are done in some secret lab as part of secret US government projects looking at plasma that we don't know anything about. But
and for likely reasons, they're investigating things for good reasons, like high energy gamma rays and stuff like that.
But the problem is that what they uncover and their understanding would fundamentally change how we look at some of these structures. And
agreed,
we're having to work with the limited amount of information that we have, which is trying to cobble together different ideas. I mean, even the follow-up video that I'm doing to the plasmoid one is taking that concept and applying it to galaxies. And even there, you look at the way that Eric sort of approached it, which was, and I can understand why you would do that, more of a mainstream approach to cosmology rather than an electric universe cosmology. But again, you have to then try and shift that to fit into that model. How does that, corroborate with what we know from ARP's work? That the idea that these quasars are ejected and that they mutate over time,
sort of fall back towards their parent. Yeah.
So what happens to a quasar when it dies? So, and does it die? Can you inject more material into it? And so he has some interesting ideas.
Do they gather
about
material themselves? Do they make material from hydrogen in the surface of the bodies that were made in the original pinch that made the quasar, and therefore more pinches are made, more bodies are made, and this alone suddenly gives literal mass or weight to the argument?
Or it's a process that repeats. So like the quasar is the high energy event, the initial formation event, and then it does indeed die. And when it dies, then there is still obviously enough material around which starts to form stars, and then the remaining material starts to fall in and forms a smaller version. So it would be an active galactic nuclei. And that periodically fires up, and that's basically his sort of extension to that model, which I then sort of adapted to fit into Arp's model. But we don't know. A lot of this is, well, I mean, we know that they form. We certainly know from laboratory experiments that these things happen. But as you say, we really don't understand enough about the limitations and the extreme behavior of plasma under certain conditions, which may very well change a lot of these assumptions, because Eric Lerner's machine is built, and his idea was to look at a nuclear fusion machine,
right?
So it's high energy, high input, whereas Bostic's work is comparatively sort of the opposite. It's still high energy to an extent, but he's firing different plasma blobs at each other and seeing that actually they form these coherent structures.
Right, and he was seeing, he was basically showing that they can form something when they hit each other. Yeah.
And then there's the experiments that someone in the comments for the Safire video, I can't remember, I think it was Karen, I think, off the top of my head, posted a video from some of the stuff that the Russians have done on the International Space Station with dust and plasma, similar to the stuff I've seen that the Americans have done. But they form these double helix structure and like an eye structure, and really quite.
We examined it on the show.
Stuff.
Actually, it was amazing. We talked about it for. Well, I mean, we couldn't get enough of it. We talked about it. It was like a hot topic for like 3 weeks. We were like always going back to that video because it was very revealing on how you think that things necessarily have to be high powered, but not necessarily. No, these things can be low powered. I mean, we talk about, for example, and this is an astronomer assumption issue that has to do with lack of understanding of electric fields, but they say, for example, they see a star giving off water, and they think this only happens when you combine these two things at this many thousands of degrees or something. And of course, Don Scott will say, he simply says, or 12 volts. Like it's like, and this is where the difference is. I mean, if you're suddenly doing that, maybe if you pulled that layer right into like where the capacitance is just touching the surface, and of course you have resonance going on there, I can picture the types of ideas of putting a catalyst in that. Once you experience it once, you'd have to try to figure out what that was. It was very similar in a way. The way they told the story was similar to how they talked about Tesla making the Tesla coil because he felt a pulse because a wire snapped, and he felt that pulse. He couldn't shield against it. Then the Tesla coil is the idea then of repeating that pulse over and over again, basically a DC pulsing machine, which is all it is. It's not really a transformer because it only has a unidirectional component, but still, this is what he was thinking was going to create a circuit, and in general speak, it does in a way, if you can stick something into the ground. But
you don't need to stick something into the ground. I mean, I have a couple of Tesla coils that I've built and sat behind me, and you don't need to earth it. The air is enough to complete that circuit.
Oh, well, I suppose, especially if you use like a fluorescent bulb, something like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, this has been fantastic, and I can't believe how it feels like you are touching that the paradigm even seems more real than it did earlier today.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's exciting things to come. But
God, yes.
I think with all of these things, we are impatient and we want to have it now. And the reality is that we can't have all of it now. It is something that they are working on. But certainly my discussion with them, I'm much more aware of how open they are within the limitations that they, obviously, because to protect their own intellectual property and to make sure that they don't undermine their potential to get new investors. I certainly see not a conspiracy, but more a someone who's wanting to do the right thing, but at the same time protect what they've got to ensure that they can continue with it. Because part of the problem is if they do release all of this, it will just end up going nowhere. So it is important for them to get that funding to continue so that they can continue to release it. And hopefully, whoever invests, that spirit of cooperation and that spirit of openness will continue.
I think they're doing the right thing, generally speaking, and I think that you're they're being as honest and open as they can be. And given the feeling that you had when you were there, like at Bath, and now that I've had the chance to reflect on it, I'm actually amazed there wasn't more of a feeling of Men in Blackishness or spies and stuff. I mean, there's Chris there. He's manning the booth. I think that was him in the video, and then I think that was you, wasn't it, Chris? Yeah.
It's a surprisingly low key affair, you know.
Yeah.
It was a surprisingly sort of calm, and for the material that was being put out there, you kind of wonder.
Very British.
Wow. Yeah, I was sort of when I hear expect gasps and more kind of it's interesting how these things happen because they've been going for so long, for so many years. You know, the few people that actually are really interested and stuck with it. That's the only people who are there, I think, at that point.
And therefore it came as no surprise.
I guess to some of us, I mean, I've heard anyone who's heard of the Safire Project and was really kind of aware of it in 2017 probably were hearing little rumors and hints around the campfire. And our community is not incredibly large, but at the same time, I was just thinking about, if you thought about the discussion, I mean, actually, I don't have to think about the discussion. This was actually a movie about this. The movie The Saint, if I'm not mistaken, was all about this exact same thing. There was a conference going down in some foreign city, and they were doing cold fusion or transmutation, and there was a whole, behind the scenes, there was gunfights and, and Val Kilmer was doing his thing. I'm not saying that's what that movie was about. Elizabeth Shue was in it. I'm positive that's what it's about. Am I wrong? No? Okay.
I don't know what film.
I'm going to watch that.
The Saint, it was a movie, and it was from 1990 something, just after the cold fusion thing happened, and it was and it was a conference, and it was all about the clandestine operations going on behind who was going to control the future transmutation of the elements, basically. And at the end, they lit up the reactor that lit up like the sun, and they proved that that cold fusion was real at the end of it. I can't believe that we are having a discussion about a movie that seems so clear about what we're talking about, and you guys haven't seen it. I mean, it's like an EU video almost, I think. Anyway, but still, that's the type of thing you just picture, especially with Piers Corbyn there, his brother is running for Prime Minister of the UK. There's all this crazy stuff. Boris Johnson yelling at people. We're all hanging out talking about transmutation. I mean, I don't know why there wasn't people in the background. I mean, maybe there was and we didn't notice it, but you just picture people speaking to their lapels softly, all clear in Sector B, target is fine, type of stuff,
That is one thing he did confirm, is they are working on a follow-up film. He used the word film. I don't know whether Canadian for film is
YouTube video. Yeah, probably.
No, well, no. Well, I don't know. I mean, they obviously they have, and he mentioned his name. There's the guy
Ben
that they
Gedlow?
used to do all the,
he's amazing.
The videography.
I actually hung out with him in Montreal. Actually, had dinner a few times. We hung out. Actually, there's some pictures of us walking around a mall, looking at the Shelby Cobras. He's Canadian as well, so it's from Vancouver mostly now, but. Yeah, he's a fantastic filmographer, and as you can see by the shots, they were just perfect.
Yeah, so they're working on something. He didn't really say what it was, but I suspect it's probably more of the whole story, because obviously they're going to go out to a much wider audience, and a lot of people don't understand. And in my discussion, he talks a lot about how he came across this, and the fact that he was searching for answers before he'd even come across the EU, which was quite an interesting sort of discussion as well. So
I look forward to hearing that.
Well, hopefully,
hopefully you recorded
it. No, that's all. That's already edited, and I'm just waiting for Monty to give me the nod. So, yeah.
Well, that was good. I saw a lot of. It was. I mean, Chris was there. Some of the footage that they were showing of what the intellectual responsibility. Like, we're talking to people, if you think about it, we're talking to people, like when you think about Carl Sagan and Immanuel Velikovsky. So in 1960-something, there's him, Leonard Cohen, and David Talbot sitting around having a conversation. Okay, and these are the people who, they had no one. I mean, there was literally no one who believed them then. There was like 5 people who believed them, that, and they managed to get like a CBC documentary made about it and stuff. And Carl Sagan chastised him so thoroughly. Well, that intellectual descendant. Well, David Talbot is still with us. Like, we're working on his work. Like, that's how close that connection is. And then on the other end, you're having Peratt, who worked with Alvane, who worked with Birkeland. Like, your intellectual descendant line is very short, and a lot of these people are still around. Halton Arndt just unfortunately passed away only 6 years ago.
Yeah.
Like, it's the lines of and it's not like they've changed. I mean, their story is not changing. I mean, it's refining, but not really changing the overall premise of electrons matter. Like, I mean, it hasn't changed. That's pretty much all they're basically saying. Like, gravity good, electrons good too. Like.
Well, I think that's why that Safire is so important, because it is the first time that we really have experimental evidence for how a model for the sun would work. Which, you can say all you like about nuclear fusion, it, certainly in terms of the numbers, fits our sun, but no one has built a nuclear sun to model that behavior. And
that's what the tokamak reactor, or I'm saying it wrong, but that's what that was supposed to eventually be. I'm not wrong on that. I think that's what they sort of like. We could prove the sun is real,
And they're still building it.
Yeah. Well, there you go. That's the issue right there. There's certain things that we would like to be true, but go on, Chris.
Jeremy Dunning Davis was, he was talking about things maybe changing a bit. He won this Reviewer of the Year award this year, for saying that black holes don't exist somehow. But last year, he was saying that anyone who was an academic involved in anything to do with any university shouldn't really turn up to an Electric Universe conference. He was saying, pretty publicly to everyone that would be his advice to anyone who was employed by any reputable institution or any university. They shouldn't go to a public Electric Universe conference. It would be incredibly bad for their career. So that is the climate that we're still in at the moment, is that no one with any stake can say anything. But hopefully,
I'm a big
like,
fan of heretics, though.
Evidence,
I mean,
this really is changing things. I mean, what Safire is doing really does change that. It's amazing to see.
It is, and it's much harder for people to start ignoring it, because it's easy to point your finger somewhere else. But where you've got hard evidence like this, it's very difficult for them to refute it. So hopefully
it's going to take time for the papers to come out. We just got to be patient.
And then time for people to actually accept it and then incorporate it in their, sort of worldview.
Yeah,
so,
right.
Well, before we go, I just wanted to. I mean, it's been about an hour and 20 now, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. But obviously, we're hitting an end. The morning has to start for a few of us, and I understand that you have some kids to take somewhere, if I'm not mistaken, Gareth. But
pick up, but yes.
Pick up, okay. But before we go, I wanted to just emphasize that the Mainwarings, the people who originally funded this and got this off the ground, and also big funders of the Thunderbolts project, the reason I think that we should give them credit is, if you think about it, this venture that they basically put their money where their mouth is almost the only thing that's equivalent to breaking a paradigm of that level. If I'm being correct, and this has nothing to do with how much of a racist asshole he actually turned out to be, but Columbus and the Spanish royalty funding him to go to the New World. Like back then, that was a ton of resources poured into a venture which everyone told them was not going to happen, and you're going to sail off the end of the world. This is because their paradigm was changed completely when they got there, because they didn't believe what they were told, and they went anyway. Well, this, I don't want to say it because but it almost feels that level of commitment, and I just think it deserved a little bit of praise. So.
Wow, like we think we're going to find India, but actually we're going to end up in a whole new world that we didn't know about.
What do you think? Isn't this it? I mean, we thought we were going to find electric universe. We end up finding uranium and plutonium and whatever the heck else we're doing over, But
isn't there evidence to suggest that Columbus knew where America was? There are maps, like the Prairie Reese map, which did show that there was something on the other side.
Isn't there evidence to prove that Monty actually knew how the electric universe was true before he actually did the experiment? I agree exactly what you're saying, because there is a small group that must have agreed with him, is what he's saying, that got him into his head that he could actually risk his life to do it.
Is this all in the Vatican libraries or something?
No, but the Pierre Reed's map is from I think Ottoman Empire, Constantinople area, 1513, if I'm not mistaken.
The 14 something or other, I thought.
Oh, well, I think there was the Onius Phidias map that was...
Oh, maybe that's the one, yeah. They're old, and the thing about them is that the annotations on it say it's copied from an older source.
Yes.
And that's the key to some of those maps. And some of those maps show longitude and latitude, which, at the time, no one knew about. Latitude. Longitude, obviously, we knew.
Well, yes. I mean, latitude is easy because that's North Star based. It's the longitude that's a problem because you need clocks, really.
Yeah.
But anyway, I just thought that needed mentioned, guys. This has been fantastic. Gareth, that was just the best, and I'm glad that you got the attention of Monty, who was very happy with your unbiased work.